Okay, my friends, this one, I'm telling you what, fasten your seatbelts because Levi Gardner is in the back house. Welcome to the RobCast, Levi Gardner.
Thanks, Rob. Hi.
It's his first time in the back house, and I literally wrote down. I never write down questions or topics for because I just go. I always know the first question of an interview, and then I just go and I follow my curiosity with the person wherever they're taking me.
So this is like an awkward first date where if you're worried that if you run out of things to say.
No way. This is the opposite. This is I know it. There's things that I need you to teach me about.
Okay.
So my friends, I'm going to want you to talk about Pedagogy of Place. These are things I've read about you.
Yeah.
Agro Ecology, biointensive and organic growing, and ecological farming systems.
That's a lot of words.
This is my agenda. This is my agenda for you and I. So let's start with, you have a piece of land in a city.
Yes.
Where?
So we are located, Urban Roots is in the southeast side of
That's
Grand
an
Rapids.
organization you started.
Yes. So
You're the founder?
I'm the founder and executive director.
Okay.
So we have a piece of land that's about 3/4 of an acre that's in the southeast side of Grand Rapids, Michigan.
I've heard of it.
A city you might
Yes.
have visited. It's about 8 degrees there
And
right now.
who bought this piece of land?
So the land is actually owned by a developer. So
Okay.
it's not right now. It's not the owner isn't doing anything with it. And then we have a building next to it, and where we have our offices and our classrooms. But the land is in an area that you would call marginalized, disinvested. So the story of the area that's surrounding it is there used to be a high school, like right adjacent to the piece of property, just down a couple blocks. And when busing happened in the late 50s, early 60s, the high school, which was called South High, was actually closed down. And so kids came to school, and it was this thriving business and economic community, and it closed down, and they sent all the kids to different suburban schools in different areas. And so then, as you imagine, there was a vortex of loss, and all the businesses closed down. And so that area has been kind of replete with substance abuse issues and persons experiencing homelessness, incarceration. So it's a pretty economically devastated area. But in that, there was this piece of land, and so along with some other people, we started imagining what could we do with this piece of land? What could we imagine here? And so now it's a garden, and we grow food, and we sell food, and we eat meals together, and we imagine possibilities in marginalized spaces. And so that's the story of what we do. I mean, we capture people's food waste by biking around and picking up food scraps on a trailer, and then we bring it back and we turn that into soil fertility, and then we grow more food out of that. So,
Okay, there's like 90 things right there. Let's start with basics. Food. What should we all know, all my RobCast friends, about the food that we are eating in the modern world?
well, to quote Wendell Berry, he said, "Eating is an agricultural act." And so with all of the discussion of, Michael Pollan and Omnivore's Dilemma and that sort of work.
I love his writing, by the way. Both of those writings, yeah.
Yeah. We're aware of those things, but eating is far more intimate than we make it. When I hear people talk about food as fuel, I'm kind of sad, because fuel is this very disconnected, segregated thing. You put it in your vehicle, and it serves one purpose. There's no intimacy, there's no connection, there's no storytelling.
Yes.
With food, there is a place, there is soil, there's sunshine. In Europe, they call it terroir, which is what is the story of the food? Where is the place that it's connected to? And we've lost a lot of the terroir of our food. So, I once saw this meme of a family sitting down to pray, and they were saying, "Dear Jesus, thank you for this meal." And then the bottom is a picture of a Mexican farmer saying, "De nada."
It was nothing.
It was not.
You're welcome.
It was nothing. The food that we eat is connected to so many different things, and the way we kind of have it compartmentalized, literally and metaphorically, says some things about our own humanity and our own spirituality, I think.
Because after this, I go get groceries once a week. After this interview here, then my daughter and I will go to the local grocery store, and I'll get this week's groceries. I don't know. Sometimes the packaging will tell me, Otherwise, I'm at many levels disconnected from who made it, where it comes from. Are the people who raised this food able to send their kids to school? Like, how does this?
Yeah.
I'm able to live completely divorced from where this all comes from.
And when you think about food, for most of us in the industrialized world, is the most basic way we interact with the natural world.
Yes.
Because we can stay completely segregated.
Right.
We can
Cement,
live
fluorescent, and tile floors,
all
and
of that.
air conditioners and heaters.
And yet, when you take a bite of citrus, there's a reason why we like sometimes. 2 weeks ago, I was on a plane. This metal tube flying through the air at 600 miles an hour, and I was longing for something alive because it's a plane. And I slowly peeled an orange, and I swear, doing that, like the people around me were kind of like, "What is this foreign smell of something that's alive?" And food is a way that we get to access the rest of the natural world and our own needs in that. Sometimes you hear people talk about who's needy. Food lets us know that we all are needy and we are all humbled. And so our connection to the soil and the sun and precipitation and hydrology, it's all embedded in our relationship to food. And so I think food is one of the most spiritual things that we have that exists.
Thank you. I love it. Okay, so this developer lets you use this piece of land. No one wants this piece of land.
So what's fascinating about it, Rob, is that the developer owns the piece of land and they are okay with us using it, but at some point it might be turned into housing, turned into development.
Yeah.
And I love Brene Brown. I love all of her work, and I love what she talks about with vulnerability. And sometimes I think about open land as an exercise in vulnerability, because when we start putting up boxes and we start putting up buildings, we get to decide who's in and who's out. We get to put up literal and metaphorical boundaries saying, you're invited, you have access, you get to attend the party, and you don't anymore. And it's funny because one day we had this gentleman walk by, and I was out working this small piece of land. And he walked by in his kind of intro, and he was kind of staggering a little bit. And he said, I did 2 tours in Iraq, currently homeless, and I have a substance abuse issue. Like that was his opening line. And he goes, and this gives me hope.
You farming this little piece of land.
Yeah. And what do you say to that? Because I didn't even give him anything. Literally didn't do anything. I was just kind of dumbfounded. But the simple kind of ability to interact with something beautiful and inspiring that was cultivated and not one more building, I mean, that speaks to something really deep inside of all of us that we long for. And, when you read about the nature deficit disorder and how much is connected between us and human beings to the natural world.
It's called nature
deficit disorder. Yeah. So Richard Louv wrote a book, Last Child in the Woods. And essentially, the more and more we research, the more we understand that we are inherently ecological beings. We derive so much of our life from sun and soil and water and fresh air. And so for many kids that are in the neighborhood that we're in, when it's highways and, busy streets and industrial areas and liquor stores, that's it. And so having something as simple and as humble and yet as poignant as a garden, the implications are massive for hope, for cultivation, for a different story being told in that place.
So what do you have, by the way, what do you have planted on that piece of land?
So, we always tell arugula to zucchini. So it's yeah, and we'll all of the vegetable puns, but we have bees now. So we raise bees. And, the other thing that we get to do is, so in addition to lots of fruits and vegetables and blueberries and strawberries and, excuse me, we have a grove of fruit trees as well, but we eat there. So when I started the organization, I just grew a lot of things and taught a lot of things.
Let's back up. Where did you learn how to grow things?
Oh, well.
Did you always love this?
That's an interesting question. I had my first garden when I was 10, so I think yes. But to be honest, so I'll back up more. So 7 days out of college, I got a job working in a building teaching people about the environment. And it,
I love the way you said that.
Yeah.
I got a job in a building teaching people about the environment.
and it only, yeah, good. It only took about 3 months. Actually, no, it was the first week. It was a beautiful day, kind of like today, except there it was in the summer, because we only get 3 months at this.
Yeah.
And it was 72 degrees and sunny. And I went outside for lunch, and there was no one there. And I went, where is everybody? And everybody was still inside. And literally, I had grown up working outdoors. So I found myself starting to get tense and anxious. Like, no, my body is clamoring for fresh air right now. And through the process of working in a building, teaching people about the environment, I slowly discovered that have to be connected to the things that sustain me. The air, the water, the sunshine, the vegetation. It's literally and metaphorically part of who I am. So I have to be. So in addition to growing lots of food, we eat lots of food. Because growing can be, and we think about it in these laborious and gross ways that farming or gardening are kind of these, I don't know, simple-minded kind of.
They're right, menial or just sort of rudimentary, right?
I ask my students all the time, when I say farming, what do you think of? And it's always the like older man with the straw hat and the overalls and the pitchfork.
As opposed to heightened consciousness and connection and attuned to deeper rhythms.
Yes. And
Which is what it is.
When I think about the Anishinaabe, who were the indigenous brothers and sisters native to our lands in the Midwest, where they had the Three Sisters Garden. And they had a calendar of how they procured food that was reflective of the seasons. And so there was this communion, this interaction that was constantly unfolding, and it wasn't this kind of industrialized spitting it out.
And the anticipation of blueberries are coming.
Yes.
And then they're going to go away, and you're going to have to wait for them again. So then you're going to appreciate them all the more.
Yes.
Like all of the comings and goings heightened the dance.
Absolutely, because when things are just constantly available in kind of an industrialized world, I think we forget the beauty of it right now. In Zen Buddhism, they call it a beginner's mind.
Yes.
That this is new. This is new.
Try this peach.
This is the best one you've
It's the
ever
best
had.
peach ever, yes.
Because it's the one you're having right now.
Kristen always makes fun of me because of how much food. I'm always like, this is the best apple ever. Because that's how I feel. This is the best taco ever.
Because always with tacos.
Yeah, that's true.
Always with tacos.
That's like an eternal truth. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. So but I was growing lots of food, and we started to realize we have to eat this. Like, we have to learn and create a culture of eating. So as a staff now, we literally eat a meal together every day. So all of our meals are prepared together, and mostly like we had a day 3 weeks ago. It was one day that it warmed up to like 52 degrees, and so one of my staff went out to the field and out of one of our little greenhouses harvested carrots and beets and radishes and prepared a meal. And yes, it was Michigan and it was the middle of winter, but literally eating things that still had a tiny residual of soil on them, which had come from the compost that we had picked up from individuals' food scraps. I mean, I think that the thing that I love about it so much is that there's ways of thinking about the world that it's linear, and then there's ways of thinking about it that's cyclical, and there's rhythms. And I feel like the rhythms that we get to tap into as growers and as eaters is this constant participation and constant unfolding of the communion of the food that we eat and the bodies that we live in.
Oh, my word. It's so inspiring. So on any given day, you're out on this piece of land, people are coming by, and then people are coming for classes?
So we do lots of different things. Our tagline is grow, eat, learn. And one of the things we want to do is, if you're interested in growing, eating, or learning, we want to connect with you. So, because one of the other things that we started a couple years ago is that we have people stop by, and sometimes, they say they want to buy some food. Okay, great. Sometimes they say we don't have any money to buy some food. Okay, that's also great. Sometimes we have people. We had a random day a few weeks ago where we had a hodgepodge of like 13 people eating lunch in this conference room that's about half the size of this room here, around this old table and this gross building that we're in, and then a guy who's volunteered a ton recited a poem to all of us, and it was just ridiculously beautiful. It was
perfect.
and this is a Tuesday. This is a Tuesday. So our invitation is to kind of be human. It's funny, we have one gentleman who's been volunteering with us for about 8 months or so, and he's actually from San Diego, and he'll say things like, this is my church. This is where I find something holy and sacred.
Yeah, yeah. And that's just a Tuesday.
And that's a Tuesday.
Okay, talk to me about agro ecology.
Oh,
Something you're known for.
yeah. So, ecology. I love the word oikos in the Greek.
House.
Yes. And we have the words ecology and economy, which are funny because people couldn't think about more separate ideas, not realizing
Which come from the same root
same
understanding. How do you
root
run
word.
the house?
How do you run the house?
Your house, the house.
The house.
The world is a house. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
And one of them is like dollars and Wall Street and hedge fund managers, and the other one is the Grand Canyon and the wilderness. And yet they're all about stewardship of the thing. However, so again, to quote Barry, he says that we have this twofold view of nature. He says the first one is just destroy, just dominate. And that's strip mining, and that's clear cutting, and it's deforestation, and it's urban sprawl, and it's all of these ways that we think about nature that it's power over.
It's here to be used for whatever we feel like using it for. Right.
Yes,
Right.
it exists as a resource. But then he says, but then there's this other side, this flip side, that he calls the terrarium view of ecology, which is don't touch it, don't do anything, don't interact, just look at it, just look. Take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footsteps. And he says the problem is if we have the terrarium view of ecology that can only exist because we have this duality over here of destruction and devastation, that it really isn't serving any benefit. And so he talks about engaging with nature as a form of communion. So ecology being the system, the thing that exists, the world that is around us. Agriculture, as it's been practiced, has been a thing to be dominated over the land. Mm-hmm. It's, I once had a friend say, I think about fertilizer the same way I think about a cup of Starbucks in the morning. It's synthetic inputs to sustain an amount of productivity that shouldn't be sustained.
I just have to sit with that for a second. It's like your body has energetic resources if you take good care of it, but like the need for caffeine is forget about how it really wants to and just override the thing.
Yeah.
And a fertilizer is like don't let it do its thing. Step all over it.
It's assuming that the soil and ecosystems have no capacity for regenerative growth, and it assumes we have to control them. It's what, there's this author, Joanna Macy, and I love her work, and she...
How do you spell Macy?
M-A-C-Y.
Okay.
And she talks about her and some other scholars talk about the difference between power over versus power with. And one of these is domination, control, patriarchy, and the other is communion, engagement, stewardship.
Relationship. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That the things are defined in relationship to themselves. And so agroecology is a big word to think about. What does agriculture look like when it acknowledges limitations of the thing, but also engages with it in a way to produce? So on the flight here, I was sitting next to a guy, ironically, who works for a agricultural chemical provider. Of course, we sit next to each other. Like, and so then he gets to the what do you do question, and we spent the entire time talking. And he said to me, he goes, I work with agricultural chemicals. I couldn't tell you anything about soil or sunshine or trophic webs. He goes, I couldn't. That's not what I do.
What's a trophic web?
Oh, that's fun. So
Let's go.
you learned about food webs when you were in school. So like the predator.
Refresh me.
So on the bottom, you've got all of the primary decomposers and autotrophs. You've got all the tiny little things in the soil, and then above that, you have maybe the primary consumers. So you've got worms and beetles and arthropods, and they consume the primary decomposers. And then you have the next scale, which is maybe herbivores, and then you've got some carnivores and fauna, and then you have as you move up, secondary and tertiary, and then finally you get to the keystone predators. But what's really interesting is
I love that whole bit you just did, by the way. I could barely follow, but I loved it.
what's funny is that we think about this pyramid, this food web, as if somehow it's, sort of domination over, and that it's humans' job to dominate over, this piece, which is to dominate over that. And actually you find out that it's so much more related. I mean, I reflect all the time on the fact that the word humus, which is the top 2 inches of the soil, is the same root word as the word human.
Yeah.
Like we're literally of the soil.
Yeah. When I began to realize that the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, the things that everything is made of, were made of, and that the environment is both internal and external, that I'm made of the same stuff, it just revolutionized the way I think about everything. As opposed to the environment being out there, the environment is in here and it's me.
Yeah. Sometimes when I taught a class last semester in this awful classroom that was just white walls, drop ceiling, one window, and there I'm supposed to, engage my students in something exciting and innovative. And I said, what is living in this room? And here I have 20 students. They all look around and they go, nothing. I was like, nothing?
Nothing?
Is there anything living in this room? Nope, nothing living. And it is that when we start to see ourselves as incarnations and as animations of all things that are living, the earth is not a wilderness thing that's out there. We're literally carrying it around and stewarding it all the time. And this body and these emotions and all of the metabolic processes that are happening all the time, they are in communion with the earth, whether we want to admit it or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You just were riffing on webs, but that was a riff on something else.
It's true.
Can we get back to what that was? Because that was fascinating. It was all fascinating.
Sure. So we're hopping around. I apologize. It happens.
No way. That happened no other way. There was something you were doing before that involving systems or agriculture or the earth or...
It was all of those things.
Okay, good. Yes, it was.
Yeah. So I'll say this. So the field of agroecology has actually come not far from here, out of Santa Cruz. And there are some farmers and thinkers trying to imagine how can we feed the world? Population of 7.6 billion people today, it'll be 11 billion and change in 2100. How can we feed the world? How can we steward the resources that we have? And in doing that, they start to actually go, that there's actually a way we can do this that's not either we lose or nature loses. There's a way actually to live in a mutually symbiotic, beneficial way. And that's the thing that I think we miss sometimes, so often.
Right.
That we approach agriculture the same way we approach lots of things, which is just violence. So it's violence, it's power over, it's control, it's domination, and it's not asking, what is the earth already capable of? It's never even trusting it to see what can just happen. So they did this study, and I found it to be really fascinating. In ecology, there's this thing called net primary productivity. And if you were to take a rainforest and look at all of the pieces of the rainforest, right? So the spider monkeys and the mangoes and the pineapples and the ground cover and the upper canopy, look at all of it. Look at everything inside of it. And they said, okay, if that ecosystem, is it better off, is it more productive if we just plant one thing in it? Or if it's all of these various symbiotic relationships going on? And what they find is that if the goal is to produce one thing, and that's your goal, and your aim is just to produce one thing, then you should strip it down, get rid of it, and just plant one thing. But if your goal is long-term health, viability, and the overall health of the whole thing, it's actually called dynamic stability, which I love that term so much.
Yeah, right.
Like,
I love it.
It's such a contradiction.
Like pushing against itself in such a beautiful way.
That you get to a thing where something is literally stable and constantly evolving and constantly emerging. I got to visit the Hoh rainforest in Seattle a little while. Trees are not down for a day before opportunistic flora are already starting to, metabolize and break down the tree that just fell over, and ground animals are using it for habitat. And so the the imagination of a natural system is constantly creating. It's just constant. It never stops. And yet the way we think about farming is this very static, controlled,
What can you
limited.
get out of this square footage or acreage?
Yeah.
And then what can you get out of it in the next crop? It's just a very production. Yeah.
And it's not, there's no communion. There's no relationship. There's
Yeah.
no, gratitude.
So you're saying that the experts are looking at the challenges we have ahead of us with population increases. The earth is capable of feeding everybody.
Yeah. It really is. And there'll be people that are like, no, it's not. It's absolutely not. It really is. We probably have to change how we eat.
Yeah, sure.
But the earth is so much more productive than we give her credit for. She's just so much more resilient. And again, I think our imaginations are limited sometimes. When you get to see, as I mentioned, the Anishinaabe with the three sisters, it's called a polyculture, which I love thinking about. It's like a community of organisms existing together. And that there's actually symbiotic relationships between plants sometimes and companion planting. And so when they were growing, corn, beans, and squash, beans naturally fix nitrogen. They pull some of the nitrogen, that's 78% of the air, and they fix it. And corn demands a lot of nitrogen. So beans and corn already have a symbiotic relationship. But then squash, which likes warm temperatures, but it also likes some level of shade, is an incredible ground cover, and so it would suppress weeds. And then sometimes they would grow, the pole beans would actually grow up the corn stalk, so you have a natural trellis system. So that sort of innovation and creativity, I mean, it's brilliant.
Tell me about your favorite plant or your favorite food or your food that does the most amazing thing on its own. If we were to say to you, show us some stuff, show us some plants or some foods that would blow our minds.
So I think for as long as I've been growing, I love growing garlic. Garlic. But not only because all good meals begin with sautéed onion and garlic.
Sure.
Right. There's that. So we have people now here in California, we probably grow something called soft neck garlic, and you grow it during the, probably plant around now would be my guess. But in colder climates, garlic is called a biennial. It means it has a 2-year growth cycle. And so people always say, when do you grow garlic? And you actually plant garlic in the fall, like between October and end of November. And what I love about garlic is it has to have cold and time of just sitting still to develop roots. That's it. The first thing it does is just develop roots without any expectation.
It's in no rush.
It's in no rush. It's just taking its time. And then as the snow starts to peel back and the sun starts to come out and the days start to get a longer, you see some of the first shoots of garlic. And every year it happens. It's miraculous. To me, like, there is hope for us in cold climates every time I see the first shoots of garlic. And then it grows and it has these stalks, and the actual flower that comes out of garlic is called a scape. And this is the fascinating thing to me. Scapes actually have a mild, pungent garlic flavor. But what you do is when they start to pop out, you actually harvest them and you can eat that. But this is the amazing thing. By doing that, and plants are just the most resilient things, by removing the scape, removing the flower, the seed pod, the plant naturally puts more energy into the bulb development. So the bulbs actually get significantly bigger once we get rid of the scape. And then we plant garlic around, or we harvest garlic around middle of July or so, and we put it up and we cure it all and we store it. But then we actually take garlic and actually break apart those bulbs and then replant those again in November. And so it's just this, it's just this constant unfolding. It's really amazing. I love growing garlic. I love reading about garlic. I love thinking about garlic. I know. It's just it's
tastes
just
so
magical.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's interesting that something that has such a distinct taste and is so amazing and makes so many things taste better, when you tell me about what I don't know about it, that's as interesting as how it tastes.
Yes.
I mean, the growing cycle and the scape and all that.
Yeah. No, because I think it's, it kind of like marches to a beat of its own, as it were, I guess. But I love anything in the allium family. I mean, I think it's a Wendell Berry poem, and he says, "To the man, to the gardener, to the lover of all things growing, the soil is a divine drug." It feels that way. It feels like a thing that is actually, literally, and metaphorically grounding for us. There was just some research that I read about how bare feet on the soil literally grounds us. And
Yes. Yeah. There's all that study about bare feet on the earth and what it does to you. It's all that interesting new research.
Yeah, and I think it's so much more just than just food. It's like for me, it's deeply spiritual. There were times where I remember going to a church that had no windows and having this pull
Absolutely
inside of me of going, there's something
this ain't right.
beckoning to me to be in the peace of wild things, as it were.
Absolutely. Now, I have a couple more things on my list that I have to make sure I cover. Pedagogy of place. You teach
Yeah,
a pedagogy of place.
yeah.
Pedagogy being a curriculum, a way of thinking about it, a lens.
Yeah. So this I love talking about this one. Thank you. So pedagogy is the means the way of leading the child, and it's just about how we think about learning. And so there was this scholar named Paulo Freire. He wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and in it he introduces this idea of that most education. And you were talking with Pete Rollins about this last week of like content transfer. Just like taking information and just dumping it into someone. And that, when I think about online learning, this is like a premier example of this. Like, doesn't matter where you are, like you can just, learn the things and then take the tests because whatever box you're in with fluorescent lights and no windows is fine. Place, when we start to think about it, tells us a much different story because it's not the same everywhere you go. So we were talking, before we started recording this, about the difference in ideas and culture and creativity that are related to a place, and that comes from noticing and observing and seeing what's the story here. Solar path, which is fascinating to me. People often don't realize that the sun is constantly changing depending on where you're at. And obviously, we have shorter days and longer days, but these things change how we feel. They change our moods. They change how we interact. They change how we think about wanting to eat. There's a reason we want soup in the winter. That's related to those things. And so as opposed to an industrialized education that comes out of somewhere and just tells you information, place begins with just sitting and noticing, and that's it. It's really quite simple and yet quite profound. So when I walk a farm, anytime I get an opportunity to go walk a farm, I got to visit this farm a little while ago, and it's just beautiful. And we just spent the first little while walking it, noticing what is the soil like, where is the water moving, what is the habitat, what are the windrows, where's the wind coming from, what are the natural peaks and valleys, where are their microclimates. All of these things are an ecological education, but they happen just in a place. There's no textbook that's needed. There's no, curricula. The land itself is wanting to tell a story, but you have to quiet down just enough to listen.
And the more every exit off the interstate has an Applebee's and a Best Buy and a T-Mobile, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Every place becomes, like in art theory, they talk about thisness.
Yeah.
And thisness is the sense in which this thing is unlike other things. And that as places lose their thisness, I could be in Palatine, or I could be in Waco, or I could be in Charleston. Like, as places lose their place, it's all the more important that, no, you keep the place that place.
That the place has some sense of place.
Some sense of thisness.
Yes.
That the place has a sense of place.
The sense has a place of thisness. I'm going to remember that. I like that.
It's two fantastic ideas stacked on top of each other. Yeah, it's like a longing of the soul that so many people in the modern world know something's off.
Yes.
And they know that new strip mall, which is going to be the same 6 taupe-colored storefronts,
yes,
with the same 6 stores that they've seen 11 miles back, they know that this is somehow connected with their own soul. but maybe can't name it, but it's every place just becomes like every other place, and you lose this soil, that tree, those birds,
Yeah.
this history.
One of the things, so I used to teach at an outdoor classroom, and it was just some benches. And I would always ask my students, this exercise, okay, when I say education, what do you think of? And it was always like school and books and tests, and generally the ones that were more honest would be like boring, fatigue, like what am I doing with my life? And they'd go through this whole exercise and generate this whole list. And then I would say, okay, now tell me when you were most alive. What did it look like? And it would be when I went camping with my brother. It would be when I decided just to drive overnight to visit my friend who wasn't expecting me at college. It would be fishing with my dad. And it was all of these stories that just kind of emerged. You didn't have to coax it out of people. It was just there because they were like, oh, I can tell you when I was alive. And when they were alive, all of their sensations were just firing. Everything about them was immersed in the space. Contrast that with the classroom that is white and fluorescent and carpet tiles, and there's no sense of place. It's just one more enlarged cubicle.
Yeah. A couple hours ago, I was in the ocean surfing with a friend, and in between sets, I got off my board and I was just swimming around, just looking at the sandy bottom, because the way the wave is breaking is determined by the shape of the bottom. So I always like to swim around to see, that's why this spot right here, it's breaking a little bit like this. And when I came in, there are these like leopard sharks. They're maybe 3 or 4 feet long. And as I came in on one wave, I was going over top of them. And my friend, when I paddled back out, I was like, did you see the leopard sharks? She's like, yeah, I did, because we had seen them 6 weeks ago. The water had been full of them. And they're totally harmless, and they're so cool when you come in because they're like swimming. I mean, you go over top of them, essentially. But we were discussing, is it a breeding thing? Is it a feeding thing? Because it's only in the winter. But why today? And then why was it 6 weeks ago we were out? We saw them again, but we surf this spot all the time. So I'm in this water hours every week. But then why so this discussion we were having was so incredibly grounding.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
that's it.
And then there was there were tourists on the beach just taking photos of the ocean, and I finished a ride in very shallow water, and I said to them, like if you step into that water just a little bit, and I pointed like a little bit out, you can like get pictures of these really cool sharks. And it was interesting to me how many different things were happening about place in that, and how that does something to me at like 1,000,000 different levels.
And to think just the sheer act of wonder.
Yes.
When that is sparked.
Yes.
And that is the curiosity from where all other good things grow.
Everything else. Right. It's why we're here at some level. Now, what I find interesting is, like, I've seen farms on the North Shore in Hawaii. I mean, I've had picnics in the south of France on a hillside with the food that had been grown. South Africa, I've had meals beside a river that have everything great. You are in a cold climate in, as you described, like a blighted area in a 3/4 of acres. It's not sexy.
No. And the semis that are driving by constantly
right.
also.
And that's why I point, what's really compelling to me is your wonder and awe is from that piece of land in that location. That kind of connection and communion and holiness is right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's almost like you went, okay, where would it be the most impressive? Because if you're like, well, the grapes this time of year in France, we'd all be like, oh, please.
Yeah.
But it's like you've picked a spot. It's almost like you went, okay, I'm going to show you how real this is. I'm going to pick the last place you should pick. at some level. Not degrading that area because it's a lovely area. I know that well. But you're seeing this there.
Yeah.
On this little piece of land
That
isn't particularly bent towards it.
No, that's there is no, romantic agrarian notion in a industrialized area. No, that's so interesting to think about.
It makes you and your organization and what you're doing, it's so compelling because it raises all these questions about everybody else everywhere else. Because this then means what you are experiencing it just takes away everybody's excuses.
Well, my wife and I talk a lot about, for all of us, I'll say especially millennials, but just in general, if you're awake, you know that there are things that are not going well in the world.
Yes.
There are problems knocking on our door constantly. Yeah. And I see this with my students, overwhelming guilt and shame and concern and what way do I go, which way is up. I'm drowning in school shootings and mass incarceration and climate change and deforestation, and what do I do in the face of all of that? There's nothing I can do. And so then the guilt is just paralyzing. And I think the simple act of planting something,
yes,
and cultivating it,
it's the least cynical thing you could do.
You can't. I've grown things countless times. Every year I'm still overwhelmed, and I'm childlike in that, because I think it really is an invitation into this common humanity that we all share. And while the south of France is beautiful, or overlooking a bluff in the Central Valley or wherever it may be, we had countless meals there in this place, and we started looking around and going, something interesting is happening just here, and it's accessible and it's available, because I think that's the thing, that the invitation has to be to everyone.
Absolutely. You've raised 1,000 more questions, but a couple things here as we land the plane. To everybody who's listening, who's like, their job is like, really, this is it? You know what I mean? Or their life.
Yeah.
They're like, there's got to be more. What do you say to everybody who's like, there's got to be more, I just don't know how to name it?
Oh. I love Barbara Brown Taylor's words of finding the really real. The really real, the thisness. Mm-hmm. Thinking about lives of strip malls and suburbs and air conditioning. The real, while it comes with a challenge and it doesn't always come with a guidebook, is beckoning us. And whether it's a garden or a walk or a hike or a poem or creating a piece of music, touching that thing inside of us that's waiting to be sparked. That creativity that's just there and it's boundless. We have to take the vulnerable act of opening ourselves up to that. I think growing is one of the most creative things that exist.
Absolutely.
And I think there's this available sort of everyday activism that's waiting for all of us, because the idea is that you either throw your life into it and or we sit back and go, no, I can't do that. That's just too much. That's too big of an ask. But what is the next right move? How do we become more awake, more alive, more engaged, more aware, more present?
What's your favorite meal?
Oh, my favorite meal. Oh, I think generally it's the one that I'm eating.
Oh, yes. Excellent. That was kind of a trick question, and you gave the perfect answer. I assume your organization, Urban Roots, I assume there are people doing this sort of thing all over the place.
Yes.
Do you have what do you even call it? A network? A coalition? A movement?
A subversive ideology.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've had the opportunity to get to travel and meet some friends and organizations. Yeah, there's some. There was a woman named Majora Carter who started something called Greening the Ghetto in Brooklyn a
Yes,
number
I've
of
heard
years
of that.
back. There's a gentleman named Will Allen who started something called Growing Power in Milwaukee. Really, really inspiring. Beautiful, beautiful work. There's a lot of work happening here on the West Coast. When I was in Santa Cruz, I just got to visit the Homeless Garden Project, where they're providing job skills, training, and food and a market to individuals experiencing homelessness in Santa Cruz. I mean, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. What's that organization called?
The Homeless Garden Project.
Oh my goodness.
And the last one
Great.
I'll say is there's one in Chicago that's really inspiring as a fellow Midwest organization called Growing Home. And they every year are working with 40 formerly incarcerated individuals, building job training while growing food in a similar blighted area and bringing about more beauty and redemption to the world, both for the individuals there and to the world around them. I mean, places like that help me imagine.
Man. Okay, so how do people get a hold of you if they want
So they can
to
go
learn more? Urban Roots.
urbanrootsgr.org.
Urbanrootsgr.org.
It's true.
Okay, you are so fantastically inspiring to me. I can't stand it. Oh, wait. One more question. Biointensive growing.
Okay. We'll go fast
One more to take. No, no, we got all the time we need in
okay,
the world.
okay. So,
One more to take us home.
oh, so there was a book called Farmers of 40 Centuries, written by a gentleman named F.H. King. And he looked at the farming tradition of the world over the last 4 millennia and kind of studied it. And then out of that, this gentleman named John Jeevons, who's also in California, started looking at how do farmers grow throughout the world. And he looked at their tools and their techniques and their relationships, and he developed this system. And it was actually out of France. He visited some French growers as well that were kind of pioneering this. And I got a chance to go and study with him last year for a little while. So it is the most beautiful system that I've ever seen. It's intended to be a very closed loop system. But the thing that I love about it the most is it's all done with hand tools. There's no mechanization whatsoever. And when visiting him, he was kind of the first person to open my eyes to, we hear the term nonviolence when we talk about activism or engagement or communication, but he talked about nonviolent ecology, and that using a tiller, which is inherently just destroying the earth, as small as it is, and he said we can interact with her in far more peaceful ways. So it's all done by hands. And in fact, there was a vineyard that was just planted in France, done using this method, where they excavate and create these trophic structures. So the soil is literally alive. The more and more we learn about soil, the more we're learning it's literally alive. Soil is, it can be dead, but it also can be the most thriving, productive ecosystem. And biointensive is this model. It's this way of looking at the soil and growing and companions and seed saving that I ultimately think is going to help us not only feed ourselves, but feed the earth and feed the world. It's a really, really beautiful system. And when I've seen it, and when I was at this farm, and for 3 days, we all ate food that was from this farm, and it was, sunflower seeds, and it was amaranth and quinoa and grains and fruits and vegetables and nuts, and it was all produced on this tiny, tiny little farm. And it really was both quite picturesque, but the energy that went into it and the care and the stewardship of how down to mindfulness and meditation when transplanting. I mean, the whole thing was just incredibly spiritual. And so for me, it's been
Incredible.
that approach particularly is something in which I find great solace and hope.
Absolutely. Oh, my word. Okay, one more thing here. This took me a minute. Your last name is Gardner. I'm not the first person to point this out.
You're not the first person to point that out.
You're Levi Gardner.
It's true. Just,
Your last name is Gardner.
I guess so.
I mean, that's... If you're not here to do this...
What am I here to do?
Man, that is... Oh, that is so good. Thank you.
Thank you
for coming by the back house.
This has been a pleasure.
So inspiring, and I hope that I hope people find you and find pieces of land.
I hope
Because
so
this feels like a subversive movement that has economic and political and aesthetic dimensions. I mean, it's everything.
It's incredibly.
Obviously, everything is spiritual, so I don't even have to say that. But
it's incredibly revolutionary,
Yeah.
while so accessible and
so
digestible.
old and so new. It's like they talk about how if it's absolute truth, it will be paradox.
Yeah.
So fresh and so ancient, so old, so new, so groundbreaking, literally.
Yes.
And yet, this is what's been going on forever.
It's true.
Oh, my word. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Grace and peace, everyone.